The town of Scranton had always been the kind of place where news traveled faster than the freight trains that once powered its economy. A city built on steel and coal, it still carried the soul of a small town. Neighbors knew who bought a new truck, who argued on the front porch, and who had switched churches last Sunday. In a place like this, any change in routine was noticed, and any rumor, whether about layoffs at the mill or a teenager sneaking out past curfew, spread like wildfire. But even by Scranton standards, the latest piece of news was something extraordinary. Andrew Harrison had come back. To anyone outside the city limits, the name might have meant little. But in Scranton, the Harrisons were practically royalty. William Harrison, Andrew's grandfather, had built one of the most successful manufacturing companies in the region, a business that had weathered recessions and outlasted competitors. For decades, the family name had been stamped on factory walls, youth sports uniforms, and even the local library wing. The Harrisons had money, power, and the kind of influence people whispered about at the diner over coffee and blueberry pie. And now Andrew, Drew as he was called, had returned to visit his grandmother. His arrival stirred the town like a summer storm. The whispers began before he even set foot on Main Street. "He's taller than his father ever was. I heard he's got a place in New York now. Some say he's already running half the family business." The stories grew with every retelling. By the time his car actually rolled through town, sleek and black against the backdrop of weather-beaten storefronts, Drew Harrison had already been transformed into a living legend. He looked the part. At 21, he carried himself with a self-assurance that belonged more to a seasoned businessman than a college kid. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly athletic, the kind of man who looked at home in a tailored suit or a football jersey. His dark hair caught the winter light, and his smile, sharp, almost practiced, had the power to silence an entire room. He wasn't just handsome. He was the sort of man who made every girl in town pause, bite her lip, and wonder what it would feel like to be chosen. And many of them tried. They straightened their skirts, painted their lips, and laughed too loudly whenever Drew appeared at the cafe or strolled through the campus of the nearby university. He seemed to enjoy the attention. To him, their admiration was a birthright, just another benefit of his name and his wealth. He basked in it, shifting from girl to girl with ease, never staying long enough to risk boredom. To most, Drew was a fantasy, an untouchable prince of Scranton. But not to Jessica Morgan. Jessica was different. She had lived in Scranton all her life, the daughter of a factory worker who never quite recovered after being laid off when the plants downsized. Her world was small. Classes at the university, shifts at the grocery store, and evenings spent reading in her modest bedroom on Oak Street. She wasn't the kind of girl who turned heads when she walked into a room. Quiet, bookish, with a habit of slipping into the background, Jessica was often overlooked. And perhaps that was why no one expected her to notice Drew Harrison, or for her heart to catch fire the way it did when she first saw him. She told no one. How could she? To her friends, Drew was little more than an arrogant playboy, the sort of man who left behind broken hearts without even remembering their names. They teased each other about him in the hallways, speculating about who he would take out next, who might be lucky or unlucky enough to catch his eye. Jessica laughed along when she had to, but in private her thoughts betrayed her. At night, lying awake in her narrow bed, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to stand close to him, to hear him say her name. She pictured herself not as the invisible girl in the back row of class, but as someone he could not ignore. She wanted, desperately, to believe she was different, that her feelings were purer, deeper, not like the shallow infatuations of the other girls. Still, beneath her daydreams ran a river of fear. Jessica knew what Drew was, knew the danger of falling for someone like him. He had wealth, beauty, and the world at his feet, while she had little more than her determination to graduate and escape the cycle of disappointment that had swallowed so many in Scranton. Yet love, or what felt like love, didn't care about logic. It came uninvited, overwhelming, fragile, and fierce all at once. In those first days of Drew's return, Jessica carried a secret that both thrilled and terrified her. Whenever he passed by, surrounded by friends and admirers, her chest tightened, her breath caught, and she told herself that he would never notice her. And yet she hoped. She hoped with the reckless certainty only youth could provide, the kind that made her heart race and her stomach twist whenever she caught the sound of his laughter drifting across the quad. It was foolish. It was dangerous. But Jessica Morgan, the quiet girl no one remembered at parties, was in love. And she didn't know it yet. But that love would soon change everything. The day it happened, Scranton was drowning in rain. A cold, relentless drizzle had turned the sidewalks slick and heavy with fallen leaves. Students hurried from campus toward the bus stop, heads ducked under umbrellas. Jessica Morgan wasn't so lucky. Her umbrella was still propped uselessly in her bedroom corner. All she had was a hooded jacket that clung damply to her shoulders, the fabric already darkened from the downpour. Her backpack sagged with textbooks, and her mood matched the sky, gray, tired, and heavy. She was nearly to the bus stop when a group of young men appeared ahead, striding slowly across the narrow sidewalk. Their laughter carried over the rain, easy and carefree, as though the weather didn't touch them. Jessica felt her stomach clench. They weren't moving aside, weren't hurrying, and she knew instantly who was at the center of them. Andrew Harrison. Her pulse quickened. She tried to edge around the group, pulling her hood tighter as if to shield herself not only from the rain, but from their stares. But the wet leaves betrayed her. Her foot slipped, her balance wavered, and suddenly her backpack lurched forward. Books spilled, pages slapped the wet pavement, and she went tumbling toward the ground. Strong fingers closed around her arm just before her knees hit the sidewalk. Jessica gasped, caught off guard. She looked up and found herself staring directly into Andrew's eyes. His grip was steady, unyielding. For a moment, the world shrank to that single connection. His hand around her arm, his eyes scanning her face with sharp curiosity. But then the laughter of his friends crashed in, shattering the illusion. They were grinning, nudging each other, clearly amused by her clumsiness. Jessica flushed, humiliation burning hotter than the rain, soaking her clothes. She tried to pull her arm free. "Easy," Drew said. His voice was smooth, laced with a kind of teasing amusement. "What's your name?" Jessica froze. She hadn't imagined this moment like this. In her daydreams, their introduction was romantic, flawless, not happening in front of a group of jeering boys while she dripped rainwater. "Jessica," she whispered, forcing the word past her lips. "Jessica," he repeated as if testing the sound. His mouth quirked into a half-smile, something mischievous sparking in his eyes. "Watch your step next time." He released her arm. She scrambled to gather her soaked books, refusing to meet the stares of his friends. Her heart raced, not from embarrassment alone, but from the fact that he had spoken to her, really looked at her. That was the beginning. Over the next days, Drew began appearing more often in her orbit. At the library, near the campus cafe, on the bus. At first Jessica thought it coincidence, but soon his presence was deliberate. He asked questions, teased her softly, made her laugh despite her nervousness. When he finally suggested they grab coffee, she couldn't say no. From there, the weeks blurred. Coffee turned into dinners. Walks across the quad stretched into long conversations. For the first time, Jessica felt chosen. Not because she was loud or flirtatious like the other girls, but because Drew had seen something in her that no one else had. Or so she believed. Word spread quickly. Scranton's girls whispered in restrooms, exchanged sharp glances when Jessica passed in the hallway. "Why her?" they muttered. "What does she have that we don't?" The envy was palpable, and Jessica absorbed it all like sunlight. For once, she was no longer invisible. She belonged to Drew Harrison. But the dream began to unravel sooner than she expected. He canceled dates without explanation. He answered her texts hours late, if at all. When they were together, his attention sometimes drifted elsewhere, his phone buzzing, his eyes tracking another girl across the room. Jessica tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself he was busy, that he cared in ways he didn't always show. But deep down, a knot of dread had already formed. The truth came on a night she would never forget. She caught him just as he was sliding behind the wheel of his car, preparing to leave town. Her hair clung wet to her face. She had run the whole way, desperate to see him. "Drew, wait," she pleaded, her voice breathless. "We had plans tonight. What's happening?" He looked at her then, and something in his expression chilled her. His eyes, once warm, were detached, almost bored. "Jessica," he said flatly, "you need to understand. I never promised you anything. This," he gestured vaguely between them, "was just fun. That's all." Her stomach dropped. "Fun? You thought this was more." He laughed softly, but there was no kindness in it. "Look at me and then look at you. You really believed this was going to be some forever kind of thing. Come on. You're sweet, but don't fool yourself. We're different worlds." The words sliced through her. She felt exposed, discarded, like a child realizing a cherished toy was broken beyond repair. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. "You used me," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't use you. You wanted this as much as I did," Drew replied, shrugging. "But it's over. Don't make it more than it was." With that, he started the engine. Jessica stood frozen as the taillights disappeared into the rain. Her body shook with fury, humiliation, and heartbreak, all tangled into one unbearable ache. That night, alone in her bedroom, she pressed her face into the pillow and let the sobs come. But amid the tears, another feeling surged. She remembered his smirk, the casual cruelty of his words, the way his friends had laughed at her that first rainy day. She whispered into the darkness, a vow meant for herself alone. "You'll regret this, Drew Harrison. One day, you'll regret ever playing with me." It was a promise that would shape the next 7 years of her life. The night of Drew's betrayal marked a turning point in Jessica Morgan's life. For weeks afterward, she drifted through her days in a haze, her heart bruised and her pride shattered. The town whispered, of course, they always did. A few classmates offered pitying smiles. Others smirked knowingly, as if her heartbreak had been inevitable. But Jessica refused to let Scranton see her fall apart. If Drew had taken her innocence and her trust, he would not take her future. Late at night, when the silence of her room pressed in, Jessica turned to her computer. She searched for stories, advice, anything that could tell her how to recover from humiliation so deep it seemed to stain her bones. That was when she stumbled across an online forum, a space where strangers confessed heartbreaks and plotted comebacks. She scrolled endlessly, drawn to the stories of women who had been mocked, abandoned, underestimated, and who had risen stronger than before. One line stopped her cold. It was written by a woman much older, someone who had survived her own storm. The sweetest revenge is not anger, not destruction. It's becoming so strong, so radiant, that the one who hurt you realizes they can never have you again. Jessica read the words over and over, her pulse quickening. It felt like a lifeline thrown across the darkness, a command disguised as wisdom. She whispered it aloud, tasting the promise. The sweetest revenge was to become untouchable. From that night on, Jessica's purpose crystallized. She poured herself into her studies, staying long after her classmates had left the library. She applied for internships, volunteered for extra projects, and pushed through exhaustion with sheer determination. Her nights of crying into her pillow were replaced with nights spent drafting essays, rehearsing presentations, and filling notebooks with goals. Slowly, her grief transformed into fuel. She worked on herself in every way. She saved her paychecks from the grocery store to buy clothes that fit her new confidence, professional, elegant, nothing like the plain sweaters she used to hide behind. She started running in the mornings, feeling her body grow stronger with each mile. At the salon, she let a stylist convince her to try something bold, cutting her hair into a sleek style that framed her face in a way she had never dared before. And with every small change, Jessica felt the power shift inside her. She was no longer the girl who had slipped on wet leaves and been laughed at. She was someone new, someone who looked forward, not back. 7 years passed, and Scranton barely recognized her. The once invisible girl had become a woman of presence, her quiet confidence drawing attention without her even asking for it. She graduated near the top of her class, earned respect at work, and learned to carry herself with a grace that demanded to be seen. In meetings, her voice was steady. At social gatherings, she stood tall, her laughter clear, no longer shadowed by self-doubt. Her revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, deliberate, and absolute. While Jessica built herself piece by piece, Andrew Harrison's path veered in the opposite direction. The boy who once held the town's admiration squandered it with reckless abandon. College freedom tasted too sweet for him to resist, and he drowned himself in parties, late nights, and careless spending. Rumors drifted back to Scranton of bar fights, failed classes, and girls who left with tears in their eyes. The shine that had once made Drew seem untouchable began to tarnish. He gained a reputation not as the golden grandson of William Harrison, but as the reckless heir squandering opportunities others would have killed for. His charm became a shield for irresponsibility, his good looks a mask for laziness. William Harrison noticed. A man who had built his empire from sweat and discipline, William had no patience for a grandson wasting the family's legacy. Board members murmured discontent. Investors whispered about the future, and William grew weary of covering for Drew's failures. At last, his patience snapped. In a private meeting that ended with raised voices and slammed doors, William gave Drew an ultimatum. Either he would return to Scranton and take charge of a struggling branch of the company, or he would be cut off entirely. Drew protested, but the choice was clear. For all his arrogance, he couldn't imagine life without the safety net of the Harrison fortune. So, reluctantly, he packed his bags and prepared to return to the very town where his arrogance had once left its deepest scar. Scranton buzzed with the news. People speculated whether he had changed, whether he would finally step up or simply fail in front of everyone who once idolized him. Jessica, meanwhile, had built a quiet but steady career. She had no idea her past was about to collide with her present. She only knew that she had worked too hard, grown too strong, to ever be that girl again. And yet, fate was already moving pieces into place. The boy who had broken her heart was coming home. And this time, the game would be played on her terms. By the time Jessica Morgan reached her late 20s, life in Scranton had settled into a rhythm she could live with. She worked as an administrative coordinator at a modest-sized firm on the edge of town, one of those companies that handled contracts and logistics for bigger industrial names. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and she had carved out respect there through her diligence and professionalism. Her coworkers trusted her to handle client calls, organize reports, and translate documents when foreign partners were involved. She had built a quiet stability, the kind that didn't attract attention but gave her a sense of dignity. The old wounds Drew Harrison had left behind no longer bled, though scars remained. She carried herself differently now. Head higher, voice stronger, appearance polished in a way that reflected years of careful self-mastery. If anyone had told her 7 years ago that she'd be the dependable heart of a small office, she might have laughed through her tears. Yet here she was. Then came the rumor. It started as a murmur in the break room. The company had been bought out. No one knew the details at first, only that a larger corporation was moving in, merging operations, and installing a new director to streamline the branch. The older employees fretted about layoffs. The younger ones speculated about bigger paychecks. Jessica listened quietly, curiosity tinged with unease. Change in Scranton rarely came gently. The announcement arrived one brisk Monday morning in the form of an email. Mandatory staff meeting, conference room, 9 a.m. New leadership introduction. The air in the office buzzed with nerves as employees filed into the room, smoothing shirts and whispering guesses about who the new boss might be. Jessica sat near the middle, notebook open, pen in hand, projecting calm though her heart ticked with anticipation. She told herself it was just another transition, another manager to adapt to. She had weathered plenty of those. And then the door opened. The moment Andrew Harrison stepped inside, Jessica's breath caught in her throat. He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of boardrooms far from Scranton. His dark hair was neatly styled, his jawline sharper, his presence commanding. The arrogance was still there. It clung to him like a cologne, but it was tempered now by an air of practiced authority. He carried himself not as the reckless boy who once toyed with her heart, but as a man used to being obeyed. Jessica's fingers tightened around her pen. She forced her expression into neutrality, even as her pulse raced. After all these years, she had prepared herself for the possibility of seeing him again. But preparation was nothing compared to reality. The sight of him ignited a rush of memory, so vivid she could almost smell the rain from that long-ago day when he'd caught her arm on the sidewalk. He began speaking, introducing himself as the new branch director appointed by Harrison Industries. His voice carried smoothly across the room, confident, authoritative. He spoke of growth, efficiency, and opportunity, using the polished language of someone trained to command. Around her, employees nodded, impressed or intimidated. Jessica barely heard the words. She was studying him, every gesture, every inflection, trying to reconcile the man at the podium with the boy who had once laughed at her tears. Then, at one point, his gaze swept the room and lingered on her. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Jessica felt it like a spark. His eyes narrowed just slightly, as though something tugged at his memory. She dropped her gaze at once, unwilling to give him more than the image of a composed, professional woman taking notes. She reminded herself sternly she was not that girl anymore. After the meeting, chatter filled the office. Some employees whispered about his pedigree, others about his looks. A few worried aloud about job cuts. Jessica kept silent, returning to her desk with mechanical focus. Yet inside, her emotions churned. She hated how her hands trembled when she typed. She hated the flutter in her chest when she replayed the way his eyes had brushed across her. But most of all, she hated the fear that he might recognize her and strip away the armor she had spent years forging. For Drew, the morning had been routine. He delivered his practiced speech, accepted polite applause, and scanned the room of unfamiliar faces. But one face unsettled him, a woman near the center, calm, professional, yet strangely magnetic. He couldn't place her, but something about her expression stirred a whisper of recognition he couldn't quite name. That evening, as he left the office, the memory nagged at him. He had met thousands of people in his life, in cities and boardrooms and parties that blurred together. But this woman, Jessica Morgan, though he didn't yet recall her name, left an impression that felt heavier than chance. He shook it off, telling himself he had more pressing matters. His grandfather had made it clear this was his last chance to prove himself, and failure was not an option. Still, as Drew climbed into his sleek black car, the image of her steady gaze lingered. Back at her apartment, Jessica stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. The woman staring back was polished, poised, unrecognizable from the teenager he had once dismissed. She whispered to herself, as if daring the past, "He won't break me again. Not now. Not ever." But deep inside, she knew the battlefield had shifted to a new arena. And whether she wanted it or not, the game had already begun. The weeks following Drew Harrison's arrival brought a new tension into the office. His presence loomed over every conversation, every project, as if his very shadow carried weight. For most employees, the adjustment was practical: new policies, stricter deadlines, and the polished corporate structure of Harrison Industries settling into their modest Scranton branch. But for Jessica Morgan, the adjustment was far more personal. One Monday morning, her supervisor pulled her aside. "Jessica, you're the strongest English speaker on staff, and Harrison wants our reports ready for the Chicago partners. You'll be working directly with him until the negotiations are complete." Her pulse jumped. The thought of sitting across from Drew, forced to speak, to translate, to collaborate, every instinct in her told her to protest. But her professionalism overruled her fear. She nodded calmly, as though the assignment meant nothing. Understood. That afternoon, she entered his office with a folder clutched in her hands. Drew looked up from behind his sleek, new desk, eyes flicking toward her. "Miss Morgan," he said, the formal tone carrying no hint of recognition. "You'll handle the translations?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, clipped. She set the folder down, careful not to meet his gaze for too long. The silence between them was taut, filled with unspoken history only she could feel. Drew leaned back, studying her as she outlined the contract details. His eyes lingered too long, not in obvious flirtation, but with the subtle weight of curiosity. Jessica forced her attention to the words on the page, translating numbers and clauses as if her life depended on it. Every time she felt his gaze, she reminded herself she was not the girl he once discarded. She was his equal now, maybe more. Still, when she left his office, her hands trembled slightly as she closed the door. Alone in the hallway, she exhaled, furious at herself for letting her body betray nerves she swore she no longer had. The tension only grew as December approached. Talk of the annual Christmas party spread through the office, an event meant to showcase the new management to clients and employees alike. Rumors circulated about the venue, the catering, even the guest list. Jessica tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the growing pile of reports she was tasked with preparing. But Drew made ignoring impossible. One evening, as the office emptied and Jessica remained at her desk polishing translations, she heard footsteps. She looked up to see him leaning casually against her cubicle wall. "You work late," he observed. "I have deadlines," she replied without looking up. A faint smile touched his lips. "The Christmas party is next Friday. I'd like you to come with me, as my guest." Her pen froze mid-sentence. For a moment, she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze head-on for the first time since he'd returned. His eyes held that same confidence, the assumption that no woman would refuse him. Jessica's heart raced, but not from flattery. Memories of his cruel laughter, of the night he dismissed her as fun, rose sharp in her mind. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "No, thank you," she said simply. The words landed like a slap. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked by composure. For once, Drew Harrison didn't have a ready reply. Jessica turned back to her papers, forcing her hands to remain still. Inside, her emotions warred. The old ache of attraction clashed violently with her vow never to be humiliated again. She knew part of her still longed for him, still wanted to believe in the charm that had once swept her away. But another part, the stronger part, remembered the tears, the shame, the vow she'd whispered into her pillow 7 years ago. That night, as she walked home through the crisp December air, the streets lit with holiday decorations, Jessica wrestled with herself. Why had she refused so sharply? Why did his surprise give her a bitter satisfaction? She knew the answer, though she hated admitting it. She wanted him to feel powerless, just once, the way she had felt all those years ago. Back in his apartment, Drew poured himself a drink, unsettled. He had invited dozens of women to countless events, and not once could he recall such a blunt refusal. Something about Jessica Morgan gnawed at him. She wasn't dazzled, wasn't desperate for his attention like so many others. Her composure challenged him, intrigued him. Lying awake later, Jessica stared at the ceiling, her emotions still tangled. She could not deny that her pulse had quickened at the thought of being by his side at that glittering party. Part of her wanted to dress in silk, to walk into the ballroom on his arm and see every jealous face in the room. But the larger part of her, the part that had survived 7 years of growth, knew that walking beside him meant stepping back into a trap. So she had said no, and in that small refusal, she had reclaimed something she thought she'd lost forever: control. Yet deep inside, Jessica also knew this was only the beginning. Their story was far from over, and her heart was not as untouchable as she wanted it to be. The weeks leading up to Christmas should have been filled with warmth and anticipation. But Jessica Morgan's home life unraveled in ways she hadn't expected. Her father, long retired from the factory, had grown increasingly vulnerable in his loneliness. One evening, Jessica found him sitting at the kitchen table, pale and shaken, a phone still clutched in his hand. "They said it was the bank," he muttered, his voice thin. "They needed my information to secure the account. I didn't want to lose the savings, Jess. I gave them what they asked." Her stomach dropped. It was the kind of scam she'd read about, the kind that preyed on the elderly and unsuspecting. Within days, the damage was clear. Thousands of dollars drained, credit cards maxed out, accounts frozen. A crushing debt now hung over the Morgan household, one they had no means to pay back. Jessica spent her mornings at the bank, trying to negotiate, and her evenings sorting through paperwork spread across their worn kitchen table. She called hotlines, reported fraud, begged for mercy from faceless customer service representatives. When she wasn't working or pleading with institutions, she was watching her father, who now seemed smaller, broken, ashamed of what he had done. "It's my fault," he whispered one night as she brewed coffee to keep herself awake. "I ruined us." "You didn't," Jessica said firmly, though exhaustion weighed down her voice. "They ruined us, but we'll get through it." Her days at the office grew harder. She held herself together during meetings, translating contracts with steady precision, but inside she was fraying. The polished armor she had built over 7 years now threatened to crack under the strain of mounting bills, collection calls, and her father's haunted eyes. When the night of the company Christmas party arrived, Jessica almost didn't go. She had no heart for glittering lights or clinking champagne glasses. But attendance was expected, and professionalism demanded she show her face. So she dressed in a deep green dress, simple but elegant, and forced herself into the crowded ballroom rented by Harrison Industries. The music was festive, the decorations lavish, but Jessica's smile was thin, practiced. She stayed close to a pair of colleagues, Kelly and Amanda, both of whom noticed her quietness. "You okay?" Kelly asked, nudging her gently. Jessica hesitated before answering. The words tumbled out in a low voice, too heavy to keep inside any longer. She told them about her father, about the scam call, about the mountain of debt crushing them. Her throat tightened as she admitted how helpless she felt, how she was holding everything together by threads. What Jessica didn't realize was that just beyond the cluster of voices and music, Drew Harrison stood with a glass in his hand. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried to him, faint yet unmistakable. He froze, his attention snapping to her. Her words sank deep. The pain in her tone, the quiet resilience, it cut through the noise of the party like a blade. And suddenly, like a flash of lightning in his memory, he knew. Jessica Morgan, the girl in the rain. The girl whose books had spilled onto wet pavement while his friends laughed. The girl he had dated briefly, carelessly, then discarded with cruel words. He remembered the look in her eyes that night, shattered and betrayed, and it struck him now with the force of a blow. His hand tightened around the glass until he set it down, afraid it might slip. How had he not seen it sooner? The curve of her jaw, the quiet intensity in her eyes, the way she carried herself. It was all there, transformed but undeniably her. and he had been blind. For the rest of the evening, Drew found himself distracted, his mind spiraling back through the years. He recalled her shy smile, her laughter, the innocence he had mocked. Shame burned hot in his chest. He had been young, reckless, arrogant, but that did not excuse the cruelty. Now, seeing her again, stronger, more radiant, yet burdened by struggles she did not deserve, something inside him shifted. The party, the clients, the polished small talk, they all faded into background noise. All he could see was Jessica, and all he could feel was regret. He wanted to approach her, to say something, to acknowledge the past. But what words could erase 7 years of distance? What apology could mend the wound he had inflicted? He stayed rooted where he was, watching her laugh faintly at Amanda's attempt to lighten the mood, her eyes still shadowed by worry. That night, long after the party ended, Drew lay awake in his apartment, the city lights of Scranton glowing faintly beyond the window. He thought about the boy he had been, the boy who treated life as a game and people as pieces. He thought about Jessica, the girl who had been braver than he realized, and the woman she had become without him. For the first time in years, Drew Harrison felt the sharp sting of remorse, and with it came a quiet, unshakable resolve. He could not undo the past, but he could try with everything he had to make it right. The December night was bitter, the kind that pressed cold against the windows and seeped into the bones of old houses. Jessica Morgan walked home with her scarf pulled tight, her breath clouding in the air. She was exhausted. Work had drained her, and the burden of her father's debts weighed heavier with each passing day. When she unlocked the door to their small, weathered house, she only wanted silence, warmth, and a few hours of sleep before it all began again. But inside, the silence wasn't right. The lights in the living room were dim, shadows stretching long against the walls. Jessica called softly for her father, but no answer came. Instead, she heard the uneven shuffle of footsteps, followed by the clink of a bottle. Her chest tightened. It wasn't her father. From the kitchen doorway staggered one of his drinking companions, a man Jessica had seen before but never welcomed. His eyes were glassy, his shirt stained with liquor. He swayed, smirking when he spotted her. "Jess," he slurred, "you're even prettier up close." Fear prickled down her spine. "You need to leave, right now." Her voice was firm, though her hands trembled at her sides. But the man only laughed, stepping closer. The smell of alcohol rolled off him, thick and nauseating. "Your dad said I could crash here. Don't be rude." His words twisted with mockery. Jessica backed away, heart pounding. She reached for her phone, but he lunged, knocking it from her hand. The device clattered across the floor. Panic surged. She darted toward the stairs, but he grabbed her wrist, his grip rough and unyielding. "Don't scream," he hissed. But Jessica did scream. She screamed with everything she had, a raw, terrified sound that echoed through the narrow halls. She fought against him, shoving, twisting, her breath ragged. His strength overpowered hers, dragging her toward the wall. And then the front door burst open. Andrew Harrison stormed inside, his face set with fury. In an instant, he tore the man off Jessica, slamming him against the wall with a force that rattled the frame. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Drew's voice was low, lethal. The intruder sputtered, trying to shove back, but Drew was sober, strong, and burning with a protective rage he hadn't felt in years. "Get out," he snarled. When the man resisted, Drew drove him toward the door, every movement precise, controlled, unstoppable. Jessica stumbled back, clutching her wrist, her chest heaving. For a moment, she couldn't process what had just happened, only that Drew stood between her and danger, a shield she had never expected. The man cursed, staggering into the night. Drew slammed the door shut and locked it, his chest rising and falling heavily. Then he turned to Jessica. "You okay?" His tone softened, concern replacing anger. Jessica tried to speak, but her throat was tight. Her body shook, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Ah, yes, I think so." The words came out broken. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head quickly, though tears blurred her vision. "No, not really. Just scared me." Drew's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching. "He won't come back. I promise you that." Jessica wrapped her arms around herself, the image of the man's face still vivid. But as her fear ebbed, something else filled the space, confusion. Because the person who had once caused her the deepest pain was now the one protecting her. The boy who had mocked her had become the man who shielded her with unflinching resolve. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. Drew knelt in front of her, lowering himself so their eyes met. In the dim light, his expression was raw. No arrogance, no smirk, only sincerity. "You don't have to talk about it," he said gently. "But I need you to know I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Jessica's heart twisted. Gratitude swelled, colliding with the old ache she had carried for years. She wanted to thank him, to collapse into the safety he offered. But another part of her screamed caution. This was Andrew Harrison, the man who had once dismissed her as nothing. How could she reconcile the two? The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken emotions. Drew didn't push. He only stayed close, steady waiting. Jessica wiped at her tears, drawing a shaky breath. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he replied. For the first time in years, Jessica felt the ground shift beneath her. She wasn't sure if it was the shock of the attack or the unexpected comfort of Drew's presence, but her carefully built walls trembled. Memories of laughter, of stolen glances in the rain, of heartbreak, all surged at once, colliding with the reality of his hand steadying her now. That night marked a turning point neither of them could ignore. Jessica had seen Drew as a boy who betrayed her, but now she had glimpsed the man who could protect her. And Drew, haunted by the past, now felt something else burning inside him. The need to prove that this time he would not fail her. The night of the attack left Jessica shaken, her sleep broken by flashes of memory she couldn't control. Even days later, she startled at sudden sounds, her body tensing whenever she walked into a darkened room. Yet, through it all, Drew Harrison remained close, not imposing, not demanding, but steady in a way she hadn't expected. He showed up the next morning with coffee and groceries, his tone casual as if to keep the weight from crushing her. He fixed the lock on the front door without being asked, muttering about security, and checked each window to make sure they closed properly. He never mentioned the fear in her eyes, but he didn't have to. His quiet presence spoke enough. Late one evening, as Jessica sat at the kitchen table sorting through bills, Drew pulled out the chair across from her. His expression was serious, stripped of charm. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. Then he said it. "I owe you the truth." Jessica looked up sharply, her chest tightening. "I remember you now," he continued, voice low. "I should have remembered the second I saw you, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. Jessica Morgan, you're the girl I hurt more than anyone, and I never forgot you." Her breath caught, anger flaring as much as pain. "Don't." He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "I was arrogant. I treated you like a game, and I've hated myself for it more times than I can count. When I saw you again, stronger, sharper, I realized how much I lost. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I never stopped thinking about what I did to you." Jessica's hands curled into fists on the table. Her voice trembled with fury. "You ruined me, Drew. You made me believe I was nothing. Do you know how long it took me to rebuild? To stand up without hearing your voice telling me I wasn't enough." His face tightened, the words striking deeper than any blow. "I know, and I can't erase it. All I can do is prove I'm not that man anymore." The days that followed became a strange rhythm. Drew visited often, helping with errands, cooking simple meals when Jessica was too drained to try. He never crossed a line. He didn't flirt, didn't push for closeness beyond what she allowed. If she asked for space, he gave it. If she needed silence, he sat beside her without speaking. One night, when a thunderstorm rattled the windows, Jessica found herself shaking again, memories of that intruder clawing at her chest. Drew was already there. He handed her a blanket, poured her tea, and stayed on the couch until her breathing steadied. He never tried to touch her, never took advantage of her vulnerability. He only stayed awake with her, patient, unyielding. Slowly, Jessica began to notice the difference. This was not the boy who had once laughed at her tears. This was a man willing to carry her fears without demanding anything in return. And yet her heart resisted. At work, she kept her composure, her professionalism intact. But at home, when she caught herself glancing at him too long, when her chest tightened at the quiet care in his gestures, the old battle reignited. Could she trust him, or was she only falling into the same trap, destined to be shattered again? Drew seemed to sense the conflict. One evening, as they stood on the porch watching snow drift onto the quiet street, he said softly, "You don't have to decide anything now. I'll wait as long as it takes." Jessica's throat tightened. His words stirred something she didn't want to feel. Hope. But behind it lurked fear, sharp and insistent. She had sworn never to let him near her heart again. To forgive him would be to betray that promise to herself. And yet, she couldn't deny the way his presence steadied her, the way her walls weakened in his company. Lying awake that night, Jessica turned restlessly in bed, staring at the ceiling. Images collided in her mind. The boy who had humiliated her, the man who had saved her, the years she had spent becoming someone new. Her heart pulled in two directions, torn between vengeance and vulnerability. She whispered into the darkness, as if to remind herself, "Don't forget what he did." But another voice, quieter, whispered back, "Don't forget what he's done now." And so the battle raged inside her, gratitude against resentment, hope against fear, the woman she had built against the girl she had once been. For Jessica Morgan, the fight was no longer with Drew Harrison. It was with herself. Winter in Scranton was harsh, but the weeks that followed brought a quiet warmth into Jessica Morgan's life, one she hadn't expected. After years of carrying burdens alone, she found herself with help, and that help came from the very man she had once sworn to hate. Drew Harrison was true to his word. He didn't overwhelm her with promises or grand gestures. Instead, he began with action. He connected her with a trusted advisor from Harrison Industries, someone who knew how to negotiate with banks. Within days, they had a plan to dispute fraudulent charges and consolidate what remained into something manageable. Drew quietly covered fees her family couldn't afford, never boasting, never making her feel indebted. Jessica resisted at first. Pride flared. She had built herself without him, had stood tall on her own. But when she saw her father, hollowed by shame and guilt, she understood. This wasn't about her pride. This was about saving what little peace her family had left. And so she accepted Drew's help, not as charity, but as a step toward healing. Her father, once consumed by drink, began to change too. Drew visited often, sometimes sitting with him in the living room, speaking not as a wealthy heir, but as a man who had seen failure himself. "You can't drown it away," Drew told him quietly one evening. "It only waits for you in the morning. But you've got your daughter. That's something worth fighting for." The words struck deeper than any lecture from a doctor or priest. Slowly, Jessica's father began to resist the pull of the bottle. He took short walks around the block, returned to his small woodworking projects, and even managed laughter on occasion. Jessica saw the light return to his eyes, and with it her hope grew. Through it all, Drew remained steady. He didn't press her for forgiveness, didn't demand affection. He simply stood at her side, proving with each day that he was no longer the boy who had broken her heart. It was on a quiet evening, after weeks of tentative closeness, that he finally asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them. They were walking along Lackawanna River, snow crunching beneath their boots, the winter sky a tapestry of stars. Drew stopped, his breath visible in the frigid air, and turned to face her. His eyes were clear, stripped of arrogance, filled with something rawer, more vulnerable. "Jessica," he said softly, "I don't deserve a second chance. But I love you. I've loved you from the moment I realized who you were. And if it takes the rest of my life to prove it, I will. Will you marry me?" Jessica froze. The ring in his hand caught the faint glow of a street lamp, but it wasn't the diamond that made her chest tighten. It was the sincerity in his voice, the humility of a man willing to kneel not out of tradition, but out of true repentance. Tears stung her eyes. 7 years ago, she had been a girl discarded in the rain, her heart shattered by his indifference. Now, she stood as a woman forged in fire, strong enough to see the difference between a boy's arrogance and a man's devotion. She let the silence linger, let him feel the weight of her decision, and then she nodded, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes." Relief swept across his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. For the first time in years, Jessica allowed herself to smile without restraint, a smile born not of triumph alone, but of release. In that moment, she understood what true revenge meant. It wasn't about seeing him suffer. It was about becoming the kind of woman he could never again dismiss, the kind of woman who commanded respect simply by existing. Her sweet revenge was that Drew Harrison had been forced to change, to grow, to fight, to love her not as a conquest, but as a partner. The town would whisper, of course. They always did. But Jessica no longer cared. She had built her life, reclaimed her dignity, and now, against all odds, found love that was real. On the morning of their wedding, her father walked her down the aisle, his steps slow but steady, his eyes filled with pride instead of shame. Drew stood waiting, his gaze fixed on her not with arrogance, but with awe. As she reached him, Jessica thought of the girl she had once been, the girl who slipped in the rain, the girl who cried into her pillow, the girl who swore vengeance. That girl had not been weak. She had been the seed of the woman standing here now. And as the vows were spoken, she felt the circle of her journey close. 7 years of pain, growth, and struggle had brought her here, to a place of strength she had carved with her own hands. Her sweet revenge was complete. Jessica Morgan was no longer the girl left behind in Scranton. She was the woman who had risen, forgiven, and chosen her future on her own terms. And as she looked at Drew, her husband, she knew she carried not just love, but the hard-won knowledge of her own worth.